Hello, Chosen One. First of all, I want to thank you deeply for being here today. Your presence is not taken lightly. If you have used the super thanks to support this message, I want to extend my heartfelt gratitude to you. It means more than you know. You did not come across this message by accident. Out of all the noise, all the endless videos and distractions this world offers, you found this one because God Himself orchestrated it. There are many forces working behind the scenes that would have loved to distract you, delay you, and even prevent you from seeing this. The fact that you are here means you have already won a silent battle. Watching this message to the end will require courage, because the enemy would prefer you to be restless, to skip, to scroll away. But stay, because this is your word. And if you are busy, I invite you to pause this video now, save it to your watch later list, and return when you can give it your full heart. This is not a message meant to be skimmed. It must be received in full to unlock what heaven has prepared for you today. In this message, you will witness how loyalty, love, and presence are more powerful than titles, achievements, or applause. Through the simple yet sacred story of a man and his dog, you will see a glimpse of the heart of God, a love that does not leave, a loyalty that does not fade, and a faithfulness that endures even beyond death. You will understand that true greatness is not in being remembered by crowds, but by being remembered by the ones who knew you deeply. Before we dive deeper, let me ask you one question. Why is it that lately you can't seem to digest the things that others still consume so easily? If you feel this stirring within you, if your heart is beginning to recognize that this message is for you, comment 777 right now below to seal your readiness to receive what heaven is about to pour into your spirit. Now, let's begin this sacred journey together. Part 1. The silent beginning of a sacred bond. It started quietly, far from headlines and flashing cameras, when a man who carried the weight of the world met a stray dog in a hidden garden of the Vatican. The man was Pope Francis, but that day he was simply Jorge, and the dog, Esteban, was no pedigree, no royal lineage, just a wounded soul with tired eyes and a limping gait. The kind of soul the world often overlooks, but heaven always sees. Just as Jesus noticed the blind beggar by the roadside when the crowds wanted to pass him by, Mark 10:46-52, Pope Francis knelt to this dog not because he needed a pet, but because he recognized a kindred spirit in pain. He looked at Esteban and said, "He knows pain, let him stay." And without ceremony, a covenant was made between two wounded hearts. Much like how God sees us not for our accomplishments, but for our brokenness, and chooses to dwell with us anyway, Psalm 34:18, in a world obsessed with titles and appearances, this bond remained hidden, sacred. "The world sees me enough," Francis once said. "Let there be one soul that sees me as just Jorge." And Esteban did, not as a pontiff, not as a leader of millions, but as a man who still needed to be loved without expectation, like David, who though anointed king was first a shepherd boy, unnoticed and uncelebrated. 1 Samuel 16:11-13, and in the silence of those Vatican mornings, walking through the olive trees, history forgot its demands, and love had the final word. Part 2. The love that asked for nothing. Every morning in the hidden gardens of the Vatican, before the duties of the world called, they would meet. Pope Francis would sit quietly on a bench, his journal open, prayers whispered under his breath, and Esteban would curl up at his feet, not demanding, not barking, not asking for attention, simply being, simply staying. It is easy to love when gifts are given, easy to serve when applause follows. But Esteban taught a different love, the kind that asks for nothing and stays anyway, just as Jesus remained faithful to his disciples, even when they slept through his deepest agony in Gethsemane, Matthew 26:40. Esteban remained faithful to Francis through seasons of weariness, celebration, disappointment, and hidden tears. He was not there for the Pope's crown, but for his humanity, not for the power, but for the presence. In a world that judges by appearances, he looked past the robes and the grandeur and saw the man God had loved first. 1 Samuel 16:7. Their bond was a reminder that real loyalty is not forged in comfort, but in consistency, that the purest love sees flaws and stays anyway, the same way our Heavenly Father does not turn away from our weaknesses, but leans closer. Romans 5:8. Day after day, Esteban's presence became a silent sermon, a living prayer, a reminder that in the eyes of love, we are never just our titles. We are simply souls in need of someone who stays. Part 3. When titles fall away, only love remains. That morning in the Vatican, something deeper than ceremony filled the air. It wasn't just the respectful hush before prayer or the routine silence of sacred halls. It was a heavy, aching stillness that pressed against the ancient stones and soaked into every shadow. The great dome of St. Peter's caught the rising sun, but the light seemed reluctant to shine, as if even the heavens knew what was coming. Inside the Apostolic Palace, Pope Francis lay in his bed, his body frail, his breathing shallow, the vitality that once moved millions now reduced to faint whispers between gasps. Aides hovered nearby, doctors stood ready, cardinals whispered among themselves, but Francis paid no attention to them. His eyes, though dim, still held a piercing clarity, and from his weakened lips came a simple request: "Bring me Esteban." For a moment the room hesitated. An awkward stillness filled the space, as if the weight of what he had said needed time to settle. A doctor leaned in closer, thinking perhaps the Holy Father was delirious, but Francis repeated it with firm resolve. "Bring me my dog." In that moment, all protocol, all tradition, all layers of title and grandeur peeled away. No longer was he the vicar of Christ, the leader of over 1 billion souls. He was Jorge, a man nearing the end of his earthly journey, reaching not for gold or power, but for the quiet presence of a soul who had seen him as simply a man. Esteban, the scruffy mutt who had once wandered into the Vatican gardens years before, had become more than a companion. He was a living reflection of unconditional love. Just as Jesus on the cross called out not for legions of angels, but for his Father, Luke 23:46, Francis, in his final hours, called not for fanfare, but for a friend. The order was given. The ancient gates of the Vatican, rarely touched by paws, were opened. Across cobblestone paths and marbled corridors, Esteban came. He needed no leash, no command. Guided by memory, by heart, he found his way. Through fountains and gardens, through centuries of history, Esteban padded softly toward the only voice that had ever spoken to him with true compassion. When he entered the room, the air thickened with a reverent silence. Even the seasoned cardinals could do nothing but step back, their ceremonial robes whispering against the floor. Esteban paused at the doorway, his nose lifting, catching a familiar scent carried on a breath of eternity. Without hesitation he crossed the floor, each step a quiet sermon, until he reached the bedside. Pope Francis turned his head slowly, and when his dimming eyes found Esteban, they glowed with a light no human strength could have summoned. With trembling fingers, Francis reached out. Esteban moved closer, resting his muzzle under the Pope's hand. In that touch, a lifetime of unsaid prayers, battles fought in silence, and burdens carried alone found their home. The Pope whispered, "You kept your promise." His voice, barely audible, carried the full weight of a heart grateful beyond words. A soft, fleeting smile touched his lips. In that sacred moment, no crown mattered, no title, no applause, only presence, only love. The kind of love that stays when all else fades away. The kind of love that Jesus showed us at Calvary, John 15:13. Esteban did not bark, he did not demand, he simply stayed, breathing softly, anchoring a soul about to step from this world into the arms of the Eternal Father. Around them, the Vatican stood still. 1,000 years of tradition melted away before the purity of a dying man's final wish. The Lord is near to the broken-hearted and saves the crushed in spirit. Psalm 34:18. Francis, once a man of immense power, ended his journey not with the grandiosity the world expected, but with the quiet, trembling loyalty of a friend who knew nothing of status, only of hearts. That morning, history did not record another doctrine or decree. It recorded the gospel of presence, the sacredness of staying, the eternal power of love that needs no words, and in the arms of that humble faithfulness, the Pope found his peace. Part 4. A farewell not measured by crowds, but by presence. When Esteban rested his head under the Pope's trembling hand, time seemed to slow to a near halt. The ornate clocks on the Vatican's walls ticked on. But inside that room, eternity brushed against the earth. The medical staff, the cardinals, the aides, all stood frozen, unable to interrupt the sacredness unfolding before them, because what they witnessed was not a ritual, not a political moment, not the passing of a religious leader. It was something infinitely more tender. It was love itself, taking a final bow. Esteban pressed closer, his fur brushing against the roughened skin of a hand that had signed decrees, blessed pilgrims, lifted broken spirits around the world. And now, that same hand, frail and shaking, found its final comfort in the warmth of the one creature who had never asked for anything but proximity. Francis did not need to speak elaborate goodbyes. He did not need to summon strength for last declarations. He simply rested his hand on Esteban, and in that stillness, a lifetime of silent prayers, burdens carried alone, and joys too deep for words found their release. The same way Mary, at the feet of Jesus, said more with her tears than with speeches. Luke 7:38. Francis now spoke volumes without a word. Esteban stayed there, breathing slowly, shifting just enough to offer his body as an anchor for a soul about to take flight. There were no cameras, no flashes, no grand procession at that moment, just the Pope, the man named Jorge, and his faithful friend, and heaven itself leaned closer, watching, because sometimes the most profound acts of faithfulness are not in how we lead the world, but in how we love quietly when no one else sees. Francis's breathing grew even more shallow. His lips moved in a final whisper barely audible to human ears. "Promise me he will always be loved." An aide, his own eyes full of tears, stepped forward and swore it, not as a political oath, but as a sacred vow between broken humans who understood that love, once given, demands continuation. Francis smiled faintly, and as his last breath left him, it left not in the roar of choirs or the blaze of flashbulbs, but in the whisper of fingers tangled in the fur of a dog who had seen him, known him, stayed with him, and loved him until the very end. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. 2 Timothy 4:7. And outside, as the bells of St. Peter's finally rang out in morning, all of Rome shuddered. The world heard the news that a pope had died, but in a small, silent corner of the apostolic palace, a deeper truth echoed through marble and memory. Greatness is not measured by who kneels before you when you reign, but by who stays with you when you can give them nothing in return. Part 5. The quiet vigil of a love that refused to break. After Pope Francis took his final breath, the world outside erupted in mourning. News headlines flashed across continents, bells tolled in cities near and far. Leaders issued proclamations, monuments lit up in white and gold. But inside the Vatican walls, where marble floors had borne the weight of centuries, there remained a sacred stillness, untouched by the noise of history. Esteban, the old mutt with patchy fur and tired eyes, did not leave. He stayed curled beside the empty bed, his body pressed against the cold floor, refusing food, refusing comfort, refusing to move. The doctors tried to coax him away gently. The aides whispered in soft entreaties, but Esteban would not budge, not because he was stubborn, but because loyalty cannot be commanded nor dismissed. It is a covenant stronger than death itself, just as Ruth once vowed to Naomi, "Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay." Ruth 1:16. So too did Esteban cling to the space where love had once breathed. The Vatican staff, so trained in ceremony and decorum, found themselves undone by the sight of it. A Swiss guard, known for his stoic silence, turned away to hide his tears when Esteban let out a soft, aching whimper that spoke more than any eulogy could. No one had planned for this. No one had written protocols for what to do when a dying pope's last wish was honored by a dog who refused to let him go. The world saw the grand funeral preparations. The world saw the dignitaries gathering, the polished speeches, the sweeping processions. But within the heart of the Vatican, hidden from cameras, there was a brown dog wrapped in grief too sacred to disturb. And as the body of Pope Francis was moved towards St. Peter's Basilica, Esteban rose on trembling legs and followed, not by command, but by love. Across marble floors where saints had once walked, past columns carved by generations of hands, under ceilings painted with the stories of salvation, he moved silently, each step a testimony, each breath a prayer. When the body reached the basilica, Esteban laid down just outside the great doors, his nose pointed towards the place where his human's body had disappeared. He made no sound, no plea. He simply waited with a patience that the world, in all its rush and noise, had forgotten how to understand. And the people who saw him, the guards, the priests, the pilgrims who dared to glance his way, they knew without needing to be told. They knew they were witnessing something ancient, something pure, something holy. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit. Psalm 34:18. And Esteban, in his quiet vigil, became a living sermon without words, a sacred reminder that true love does not abandon, does not negotiate, does not leave when titles fade. It simply stays, and by staying, it makes even death feel less final. Part 6. When the world watched, but heaven wept. As the funeral day dawned, St. Peter's Square swelled with a sea of mourners. Thousands gathered under the vast blue sky, dignitaries draped in somber black, heads of state standing stiff in their formality, pilgrims clutching rosaries in trembling hands. The bells of the basilica tolled with heavy finality, each chime a ripple across the city of Rome, Inside the basilica, the air was thick with incense and grief. Cardinals moved in solemn procession. Choirs sang ancient hymns that soared toward the vaulted heavens. The casket, draped in simplicity as Francis had wished, stood alone in its silent majesty. But beyond the cameras, beyond the eyes of the world, something more profound was happening. Esteban, small against the towering walls and grand columns, had found his way to the edge of the platform. He lay down again, curled into a quiet ball of grief, watching, listening, waiting. The guards had tried to lead him away gently that morning. One even brought a blanket, another knelt and offered him bread, but Esteban refused, not out of disobedience, but out of love. His loyalty demanded no explanation, just as Mary Magdalene had stayed by the tomb when the disciples had fled, John 20:11. So Esteban stayed, steadfast and silent. The world may have thought the most powerful testimonies that day were the speeches given by presidents and kings, but heaven knew otherwise. Heaven knew that the truest sermon preached that day was the one wrapped in brown fur, breathing slowly at the feet of a casket, a sermon of presence, of covenant, of unyielding love. The cameras caught him eventually. A journalist lowered his camera in awe, capturing not just an image but a story the world could not ignore. A brown dog lying near a pope's body, refusing to leave, refusing to move, refusing to betray a love that had seen him when no one else did. Within hours, the photo flashed across headlines. The dog who would not leave the Pope. News anchors struggled to put into words what hearts already knew. The Vatican, caught off guard by this unexpected outpouring, issued a simple statement. The Holy Father was accompanied in his final moments by his faithful friend Esteban. May we all love with such loyalty. No grand theological treatise, no elaborate defenses, just a simple truth that echoed louder than any cathedral bell. In the end, it is not power that defines us, but who stays when there is nothing left to offer. A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for a time of adversity. Proverbs 17:17. Esteban's small body at the edge of that vast gathering became the still point around which the world's mourning turned. And in that moment, as heaven wept and the earth watched, the lesson of a lifetime was whispered not through words, but through love that refused to die. Part 7. When silence spoke, louder than any crown. The hours after the funeral stretched long and heavy across Rome. The dignitaries returned to their palaces. The crowd slowly thinned, pilgrims scattered to their hotels. The bells fell silent, and the marble floors of the basilica cooled under the absence of footsteps. Yet Esteban remained, curled up not by force, not by ceremony, but by something deeper, something the world could scarcely comprehend. Love, pure and unbroken. The guards, unsure what to do, simply watched. Some tried to lift him gently, but Esteban resisted, not with growls or bites, but with the quiet stubbornness of grief too deep for words. His paws pressed against the cold stone as if anchoring himself to the memory he refused to abandon. His body heavy, not from age alone, but from the sheer weight of devotion. Just as the women had lingered by Jesus' tomb when all hope seemed lost. Matthew 28:1. Esteban remained by the stone that now cradled his master, a small brown guardian against the tide of history moving too fast around him. Inside, the clergy debated behind closed doors. Senior priests wrung their hands over protocol. Bishops whispered of decorum. Some argued that tradition demanded the basilica be kept pristine. Others worried that allowing a dog to remain at the Pope's resting place would send the wrong message. But amid their arguments, an old cardinal rose slowly, his voice thin but unbreakable, and he said simply, "What greater honor could there be than loyalty that refuses to leave even when the world moves on?" And at that moment, no one dared argue further. They let Esteban stay, not as a disruption, but as a living testament. The Vatican, so often steeped in rituals and pageantry, bowed quietly to the power of a presence that needed no words. "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." Matthew 5:4. In the evenings, as the light slanted through the stained glass windows and spilled rivers of crimson and gold across the marble, visitors would pause in hushed reverence at the sight of him, a simple dog lying against a simple tomb, and somehow it was more sacred than all the golden altars combined. A child approached once, a daisy clutched tightly in his small hand. He knelt without being told, placed the flower gently beside Esteban's paws, and whispered, "Thank you for loving him." And in that moment, every heart present knew that they were witnessing something holy, not constructed by human hands, but breathed out by the Spirit himself. The lesson was no longer hidden in theology or veiled in ritual. It was alive, tangible, beating in the quiet, stubborn heart of a creature who had given everything he had, and all he had was himself. Part 8. The unseen battle between duty and devotion. Night fell over Rome like a heavy velvet curtain. The crowds outside the basilica had mostly gone. Only a few faithful lingered beyond the iron gates, clutching flickering candles, whispering prayers into the chill of the evening air. Inside, under the soaring arches, where the echoes of choirs once soared, Esteban still lay pressed against the tomb, unmoving, unwavering, the marble beneath him cold, the darkness settling deep into every crack and corner of the ancient stone. Yet the small brown figure remained, a tiny heartbeat stubbornly refusing to surrender. The priests and guards, now exhausted, gathered once more behind closed doors, voices low, strained. Some argued again. Decorum must be preserved, tradition must be upheld, the dog must be removed. The basilica, they said, was no place for such sentimentality, but others, quieter, humbler, shook their heads, because they had seen something the world rarely glimpses, a devotion so pure it silenced arguments, a love so fierce it made doctrines seem small. Sister Agnes, the quiet keeper of the Vatican gardens, stood in the corner, her hands clasped tightly, her voice steady but trembling, and she said, "If we remove him, we are not preserving holiness, we are betraying it." And in that moment, the battle between duty and devotion ended. The decision was made: let him stay, not as a disruption, but as the living embodiment of everything Pope Francis had preached. Let all that you do be done in love. 1 Corinthians 16:14. Outside, news had spread like wildfire. Candles multiplied along the Vatican fences. Messages written hastily in trembling hands lined the gates. Drawings of a pope and a dog under an olive tree. Notes that read simply, "Thank you, Esteban. You showed us how to love." You are his last prayer. Around the world, millions who would never set foot inside St. Peter's Basilica felt their hearts torn open by the quiet loyalty of one small dog. Because even through digital screens and printed headlines, the truth pulsed unfiltered. Love that refuses to abandon is the truest sermon of all. Esteban did not move when the night deepened. He did not lift his head when the candles flickered and died one by one. He did not flinch when the last of the guards lowered their heads and retreated into the shadowed halls. He simply stayed, his body frail, his breathing shallow, yet his spirit fierce and shining like a lantern in a world that so often forgets what matters, and unseen by human eyes, heaven itself leaned closer, the angels themselves holding their breath, because sometimes the greatest battles are not fought with swords or speeches, but with the stubborn, holy act of staying when everything else says, leave. Part 9. The legacy written in silence and tears. As the first fragile light of dawn brushed the highest windows of the basilica, casting rivers of pale gold across the cold marble, Esteban still lay there, unmoved, unyielding, a solitary figure keeping vigil over a man the world had come to honor, but he had simply loved. Outside the iron gates the crowd had returned, thicker than before, thousands standing in reverent silence, candles in their hands, prayers on their lips. Journalists whispered into cameras, reporting what they could barely put into words. A dog, a tomb, a love that had refused to leave even when the world did. Inside the basilica, senior cardinals gathered in hushed tones, looking from the small, still body of Esteban to one another with a mixture of awe and helplessness. One suggested again that the dog must be moved soon for the sake of protocol, but Cardinal Montini, whose voice had aged into a trembling whisper of wisdom, shook his head and said, "History will not remember our robes or our rituals, it will remember this." And with that, the decision was sealed. Let him remain as long as he needs. The Vatican, a place known for tradition older than nations, chose that day to honor something older still. Loyalty, devotion, love that asks for nothing and gives everything. Now these three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. 1 Corinthians 13:13. As the sun climbed higher, spilling warmth into the great basilica, workers moved quietly, preparing for another day of public mourning. But none dared disturb Esteban, who lay as he had all through the night, his fur warmed by the light of stained glass, his breath a slow, steady rhythm of waiting. A young boy slipped past the guards carrying a simple daisy. He approached without fear, knelt beside Esteban, and placed the flower gently against his side. Esteban did not lift his head, but his tail thumped once against the stone in acknowledgement. Outside, the candles continued to multiply, a living river of flame wrapping around the Vatican walls, and the people, pilgrims, citizens, leaders, wept not because a pope had died, but because in a world starving for real love, they had glimpsed it raw and unfiltered in the faithfulness of a simple dog. As the noon bells rang slow and heavy across Rome, the Vatican announced that Esteban would be allowed to stay, his place honored, his vigil respected, and a small plaque would be placed near the tomb, not for grandeur, but for memory, a reminder that sometimes the truest witnesses are not the ones who speak, but the ones who stay. In the hush that followed the bells, Esteban stirred once, lifting his head slightly, his ears twitching as if catching a voice only he could hear. And then he lowered his head again, his body folding gently into stillness, not with struggle, not with fear, but with a peace that only love can grant. And in that final breath of devotion, a greater sermon was preached than all the cathedrals ever built. A sermon written in silence, in tears, and in the stubborn, holy act of loving until the very end. Part 10. When love is the only thing that remains. As the final day closed and the basilica's great doors stood heavy against the Roman sky, the last candles flickered in the gentle breeze, and Esteban, faithful to the last breath, had finished his vigil, not in the eyes of men, but in the heart of heaven. His small body, once scarred by the streets of Rome, now rested forever wrapped in the shawl that had once covered the shoulders of a man the world called Pope, but he simply called friend. In that stillness, in that sacred silence, the truest legacy was written. Not in gold or marble, but in the quiet witness of loyalty that outlived the applause, of love that outlasted the crowns, of presence that remained when all else faded. Pope Francis, in his final request, had taught the world what no sermon ever could, that in the end, titles fall away, power evaporates, achievements crumble into dust, and the only thing that remains, the only thing that matters, is who stayed, who loved, who knelt beside you when you had nothing left to give. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Matthew 6:21. In that final moment, as the heavens welcomed a soul home and a faithful companion rested beside the tomb, a message was carved into the hearts of millions across the world. A message not of doctrine or dogma, but of love. Fierce, stubborn, unyielding love. The kind of love that mirrors the heart of Christ, who stayed with us even unto death, who bore our scars, who refused to abandon us even when the world had. I am with you always, even to the end of the age. Matthew 28:20. And today, chosen one, this story is not just about a pope and his dog. It is about you. It is about your heart, your loyalty, your unseen battles, your private tears, the moments you stayed faithful when no one was watching, the times you loved when it hurt, the seasons you clung to God when you didn't understand why the world was silent. You have been seen. You have been chosen. You have been loved with an everlasting love that refuses to abandon you. Jeremiah 31:3. And now it is your time to rise. Not in the applause of men, but in the quiet certainty that heaven is cheering you on. Your story is still being written, your legacy still unfolding, and the greatest honor you can give to the one who stayed with you is to stay faithful to the calling placed within you. So today, if your spirit feels stirred, if you know deep down that you are one of those who refuses to leave, refuses to give up, refuses to betray love, comment 777 below right now to seal this moment, to declare that you are ready to walk with the same fierce loyalty and unwavering love. And if this message has moved you, touched you, awakened something deep inside you, share it with someone else who may be fighting their battles in silence. Remind them that they are not forgotten, not forsaken, but fiercely loved. And if today your heart is ready to surrender, to walk deeper with the God who never left you, then whisper this simple prayer wherever you are. Lord, I choose you, not because I am strong, but because you stayed when I was weak. I believe you have called me, loved me, and chosen me for such a time as this. I surrender my life to you fully, and know that in heaven right now, the angels are rejoicing. Luke 15:10. Because one more heart has found its way back to the arms that have always been open. You are not alone. You are not forgotten. You are not invisible. You are chosen, loved, sealed, and sent. Now rise, chosen one. Rise, and let your love echo into eternity.